Well, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Beth Hendricks. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Colorado. And thank you for coming to tonight's presentation hosted by our Alternative Voting Methods Task Force. We are excited to welcome two speakers tonight. Dillon Rankin and Ed Heitzmann. We will start out with Dillon, but before we do, I would just like to thank you all for your patience and interest. As you know, the chair of this, or as you may know, the chair of this task force has stepped away from her duties as she's running for Secretary of State. So I am doing my best to keep this cobbled together, this task force, and I really appreciate your help in doing so. So thank you especially to our two speakers tonight and to Jen and Neil and Celeste and any others who have provided me with info and encouragement. So um, first, let's go ahead and start with our first speaker. Dillon Rankin is a current political science student at CU Boulder and a lifelong Longmont resident. He co-founded ranked choice voting for Longmont in August of 2024 and is leading the effort to bring ranked choice voting to the city's municipal elections. Dillon has been passionate about electoral reform and alternative voting methods ever since his middle school civics teacher gave him a book on the subject. So, Dillon, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Beth, and thanks to everyone for being here. Yeah, I'm so excited to dive into our ongoing effort to bring ranked choice voting to Longmont elections. I have some slides. Is it okay if I go ahead and put them up? Cool. Okay, now here comes the scary part where I try to actually put them up. Let's see if we can do it. Is that visible to people? Yes, no, no.
Not yet, but it's coming.
Hmm.
There you go.
Yes. Okay, great. Super cool. Still visible? I'm still here.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, amazing. So yeah, so I'm Dillon. As Beth said, I've been a lifelong Longmont resident, passionate about alternative voting methods for a long time, a huge democracy reform nerd, and excited to geek out with you guys for a little bit about what were the super exciting stuff that's happening in Longmont. So you already know a little bit about me. Longmont is, of course, a mid-sized city of 100,000 people on the Front Range, and have been passionate about this stuff since middle school and high school. I started to get my student government to start using ranked choice voting in student body presidential elections. And actually, my and the picture on the left. Me and my best friend Summit, who is there on the left, ran in our school's first ranked choice student body presidential election against one another, and I lost a nail biter to him. But we converted our friend Dagny, who's in the middle there, and she ran in the second one, and the three of us have been doing this work together for a while now. I founded the group back in 2024 after I decided to stay local for college. And I was just like, yeah, like why not try this? Which in retrospect, was like, what was I thinking? I have no idea what the plan was at the time, but I just started reaching out to folks and seeing if using ranked choice voting in Longmont municipal elections was something that people would be interested in advocating for. And long story short, it absolutely was. I think people were really excited to continue building on the successes in Boulder, in Fort Collins, and in cities around the country that have used ranked choice voting and are, when folks start using it at the local level, I think they really see the benefits there and benefits that can translate to higher levels of government as well. So we've been, plugging away, trying to convince city council, trying to put ranked choice voting on the ballot. for a little over 2 years. And the picture on the right was taken this past January 14th, was at a city council meeting where they were finally taking a vote on whether or not to put it on the ballot. And we got a bunch of people out in the community, just a really strong grassroots like outpouring of support of people who just are excited and passionate about better elections. And long story short, we won. We got ranked choice voting on the ballot this November. I'm gonna before I go into kind of like our campaign and stuff like that, I wanted to walk you guys through what our specific policy proposals are in Longmont. Would that be of interest to people? And if not, I can kind of scoot ahead. Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Should I go? I'll start with that.
Sounds good.
Cool. Okay. So, I mean, the one of the really exciting things about our proposal, specifically from a an election improvement from an alternative voting methods standpoint, is that we get to two different ranked voting methods are incorporated into our proposal, and I'll talk a little bit about how on the next slide. But we have there is obviously the single winner form of ranked choice voting is, I think, the one that most folks are familiar with. It's the one that's in use in the city of Boulder for its mayoral election, in city of Fort Collins for all of its city council seats. And of course, in both forms of ranked choice voting, voters are ranking candidates in the order of their preference, one, two, three, four, and so on, with votes starting off with their first choice, and remaining with their first choice until that candidate is either elected or eliminated in successive rounds of tabulation redistribution until the correct number of winners clears a set winning threshold, which in the single winner context is always a majority, always 50% plus one. And in the multi-winner context, it depends on the number of winners to be elected. In the two winners, it's a little over one over three. Three winners is a little over one over four, and so on and so forth. Single winner ranked choice voting is already something that voters know and love where they use it, I think. It allows for voters to not have to vote for the lesser of two evils when they cast their ballot, because their second, third, and so on choices kind of get to be like backup choices. Like, I get to rank my first person first, even if they're independent, third party. I don't think they have a great shot at winning, no matter what, because if they can't win, then my vote still counts for my second choice or my third choice or so on. And so finally, voters can kind of get out from under this omnipresent concern about electability. Is my true favorite electable? Or can I really vote for them without throwing away my vote? Or is it just a waste of time to support them? So voters, I think, really resonate with that at a time when electability has become such a concern, and when people are like, well, I might not be your first choice, but I've got the best chance at beating the person you really hate, and all that kind of stuff. So it's really great. It also obviously has the advantage of promoting consensus winners. Because the winner has to receive over 50% of the vote, and then it can also incentivize positive issue focused campaigning in that all of a sudden, if I'm a candidate, I can go out and instead of, if someone has already decided who their first choice is going to be, closing the door, if I'm out canvassing, I can say, okay, well, okay, your first choice is decided, but actually, I would still love to be your second choice, and let me tell you about all the ways that me and your favorite candidate actually align on the issues. And so there have been the instances of candidates cross-endorsing each other that happened in the New York City mayoral primary last year, and really going and it makes election dynamics, I think, a little bit more favorable to collaboration and positivity, which are things that I think are sorely needed in civic discourse in our day and age. So again, fantastic. Really excited to be going to bat for instant runoff voting, or as we call it, single winner ranked choice voting in Longmont. But the really exciting stuff, I think, from a voting methods perspective, is the multi-winner form of ranked choice voting, which is technically called single transferable vote, or STV. Again, it's still, from a voter's perspective, exactly the same. All I'm doing is ranking the candidates in the order of preference. And of course, that still means I don't have to vote for the lesser of two evils, or think about if I'm throwing away my vote by voting for my true favorite. The exciting thing that multi-winner ranked choice voting does, that single winner ranked choice voting does not, is it acts as a form of proportional representation, which is a fancy way of saying that my group of winners should reflect, by and large, what the electorate looks like. If I'm electing a group of three winners, and two-thirds of my electorate is liberal and one third is conservative, then my three winners should be two liberals and a conservative. And just it allows not only for majority rule, but for minority representation in the same group of winners. And really, allows people to, from across the ideological spectrum, elect their representatives of choice. It also has a number of additional benefits that I think are super cool and worth exploring. One, it has been used in places where there's racially polarized voting to ensure that voters that belong to race and language minority groups are able to elect their candidates of choice. There's actually been a number of instances of places that have been sued under state and federal voting rights acts, adopting multi-winner ranked choice voting as a remedy to ensure that those voters can have their seat at the table and be able to elect representatives of their choice, even if they don't constitute a majority in a given district, even if they're not concentrated in one area of a jurisdiction. It allows voters to elect candidates of choice on those bases as well. And the other thing that I think is really exciting, that hopefully if and when this takes off and is used at state and federal levels of government, is you can't really gerrymander multi-winner districts under proportional representation. And so this is a way to instantly fix this gerrymander stalemate doom loop that we're in, where the red states are gerrymandering, the blue states are gerrymandering in response, and we're all just ending up in a big spaghetti mess of districts. Yeah, Beth, go for it. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Dylan. Would you mind describing a situation when a multi-winner RCV could be used? I think that is something that is hard for a lot of people to understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's primarily used in elections. It can be used in elections for any sort of multi-member elected body. So we're talking like a city council, a state legislature, a board of county commissioners, anything like that. And you're still just ranking the candidates as you would, but instead of one winner being chosen, it's two or three or four or so on or so forth. And then that group of winners will broadly reflect the ideological and demographic makeup of the voters who chose them, or reflect them, be reflective of the electorate on the grounds that are important to them. Does that kind of make sense, or is it worth going a little deeper there?
Makes sense to me, but
And that's the other
everybody
thing.
else
I'm
good?
I'm yeah, please interrupt or raise your hand, or like I'm yeah, I'm so down to not fly through this, and I don't want to get to the end and have all the questions be at the end. I love having the questions answered as they come. Um, yeah, so that's kind of the additional benefits that multi-winner ranked choice voting shares, that single winner ranked choice voting does not share, I should say. And if Longmont were to pass our ranked choice, go ahead, Betsy.
So to adopt this, would a government need to design multi-winner first? So,
Yes,
in other words, if you only have one open seat, you have to alter? Yeah. So
that
there's an extra step here, right?
yes. And I'll talk a little bit about how for Longmont, it's not really an extra step just by the virtue of the way our city council is set up. This is the form of ranked choice voting that would work for us. But in, for example, the state house, if they were looking at for the state house where all of our state representatives and state senators are elected from single member districts, you would first have to create multi-member districts before you were able to use multi-winner ranked choice voting. That's absolutely right. So it's a bigger change, but it is ultimately, we believe, a more beneficial change, if that makes sense. So the proposals that City Council put on the ballot in Longmont, there's actually two of them. We have two measures on the ballot this November. The first one is, should we use the applicable form of ranked choice voting, be it single or multi-winner, as the case may be, in future City Council elections beginning in 2029? That's question one for voters. Question two, and this one requires, I think, a little bit of context, is so we have in Longmont, with the exception of our mayor, the other six members of city council, three of them are elected from single member districts. like in the state house, and three of them are elected from the whole city, from the city at large. And currently they're elected for 4-year terms in alternating groups of three in at every odd year November election. So 2025, 2027, so on and so forth. So currently in one cycle, the ward representatives, the district representatives from wards 1 and 3 and one at-large council person is elected. And then in the other cycle, the other two at-large people and the ward representative from Ward 2 are elected. So that's kind of how our city council is set up right now. And the other proposal on the ballot in Longmont is to realign these election cycles so that in one cycle, all of the district representatives are up for election, and then in the other cycle, all of the ward representative or the at-large representatives are up for election. And this is what would then enable us to use multi-winner ranked choice voting when we elect those three at-large representatives in the same cycle. We would use multi-winner ranked choice voting to elect all three on the same ranked ballot. So that's kind of the policy, and we're really excited to go to bat for both because if both were to pass, Longmont would be the first city since I think the 1920s or something like that to use multi-winner ranked choice voting in its elections. And we are excited for the possibility what that might represent for other communities around the state. So, any questions about, before I move on, the
All right,
policies that
the
were
first city in Colorado, or
first in Colorado? Yes. If I said otherwise, I apologize. Barb, go for it. I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think, well, that was my next question I was going to ask before you went to this slide of how do you adjust the cycles. Like, and it worked out well that you have three at large and three wards, but like, for example, in Greeley, we have four wards and two at large. Would you have to think about doing something different with the ward situation? I mean, is it better to have it two balanced or is an off balanced a situation like we have acceptable to do this with?
I mean, I am always, it really depends on what, for us, it depended on what we could get away with, what we could convince our city council to do. And so, I mean, I still think that any form of ranked choice voting is an improvement on the way that we vote now. And so if whether or not those at-large people are elected in the same cycle, you can still use single winner ranked choice voting to elect them, as well as obviously with your ward representatives as well. It is, if I'm remembering correctly, experts recommend electing at least three people using multi-winner ranked choice voting, at least a three-winner election to start to see proportionality in the results, to start to see the group of winners reflecting the electorate as a whole. I think between like 3 and 7 is kind of the sweet spot there. So in Longmont, we just got lucky. We had three existing at-large seats. It helped. But if you can convince your city council to do a more fundamental restructuring of city elections, we think the more multi-winner ranked choice voting you can sell them on, the better. I mean, in an ideal world, I would have loved to have get rid of Longmont's wards and gone to all at large, 6 at-large seats in 2 cycles of 3. But obviously, I pitched the mayor on that, and she was like, nope. Can't do that. And so this is just our middle ground that we ended up with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And just a short follow-up,
Absolutely.
would it be acceptable perhaps to put the mayoral election in the at-large
Yeah, I mean, so for
cycle?
us, our mayor is actually elected every 2 years in every
Uh-huh.
cycle. She's the only city council person that's elected at every one. So
Oh,
for us,
okay.
we just kept doing it that way. But absolutely, you could put the mayor wherever it makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions about the proposals on the table in Longmont? So I mean, this I guess brings me to how oops how we win, which is so these are amendments to the city charter. So even though we convinced city council to put them on the ballot, they are just on the ballot. We still need a majority of Longmont residents to vote yes in November. As exciting as this opportunity is, I've got to admit I'm equal parts excited and terrified because November 3rd is 78 days away, we have a very, very short window of time to convince, I mean, we're expecting 45,000 people in Longmont to vote this election cycle. So we need to really get out in front of 25,000, 30,000 people if we're going to have a good shot at winning this thing. And we need everyone's help who is invested in the future of alternative voting methods in Colorado if we're going to get this done. The first thing that we're going to be doing on October 30th, 2 weeks from yesterday, we're having a campaign kickoff event from 3 to 5 at Rogers Grove Park in Longmont. I can send like an RSVP link in the chat afterwards if it's helpful. This is the fun event because we're serving sweet cow ice cream for free, and you get to use multi-winner ranked choice voting to help us determine which 3 ice cream flavors are going to be free. So come on down. If you can make the drive, even if you're not in Longmont, we would love to see league faces there. It should be a really fun time and a really fun way to generate some enthusiasm for these proposals. And yeah, it's going to be great. Next thing on September 12th, just going to be early afternoon, but exact date, exact time, and location TBD. We're going to be having a canvas training to prepare our grassroots volunteers to effectively reach out to voters because we see a ground game being a really important and really crucial part of convincing voters that this is a good idea. If they're seeing neighbors and volunteers out in the community, doing this and being in favor of this, I think it's going to go a long way towards a win. And of course, we don't want to send people out in the field blind, and so we want to make sure that people know exactly what to do and how to do it. And that's what the September 12th will be all about. And then we're going to follow that actually with a happy hour social event in the evening there. So hopefully we'll bore you with canvassing etiquette and know-how, and then we'll get you a free beer or something like that at a brewery afterwards and repay you a little bit for that. And then lastly, September 19th through October 31st. Those are the 7 Saturdays prior to Election Day. We want to do canvassing. We want to do the door knocking, get out, knock those doors, get people excited about this, help educate the public about what this change is. And I have a very lofty goal. I want to hit 10,000 doors in 7 weeks. Which we can do. It is possible, but we need everyone's help. So if you're around Longmont, even if you're not in Longmont, I want you here. I would love to have you, even just a couple Saturdays, help us reach those voters, because that is what we need to win. So I think that is that is really all I have in terms of content of me just speaking at you. But I'd love to just have a discussion and gauge y'all's reactions and answer questions and really just appreciate Beth, you for having us and for y'all to listen and taking the time to hear us. So thank you so much.
Barb, Barb
Go
has
for
a
it.
question. Oh,
I do. I was going to kind of go back a minute and find out on how you actually got did you have to petition to get the issue on the ballot, or how'd you go about doing it? Or just you talk to city council?
For us, so yeah, I mean, there's for home rule municipalities like Longmont, there's 2 ways you can go towards getting something on the ballot. There's one, running around and collecting a bunch of signatures, and there's two, asking city council nicely. And for us, I think we had to get 7,000 valid signatures in a 90-day window, which
Hmm.
really meant like 10,000 signatures because of signature validity rates. And we were just like, oh my gosh, that is so crazy fast. And so we went the ask city council nicely route. And it was just lots of conversations with local electeds and getting them done. And I was really impressed by the detail and the seriousness with which our council approached the issue. They heard from a lot of people on both sides, and ultimately, I think the consensus was there's passion on both sides. Seems like there could be some benefits here, but ultimately the community should be the judge of how they want to vote for us. So they were willing to put that on the ballot for us, and it was a fun process getting to know them and making that happen. But a lot of it, and I mean, I'll go back to this slide here. This picture was taken at 12:45 in the morning. after a 6.5 hour city council meeting. And so we got a lot of people out in the community to come and stay and say, we want you guys to do this. And we really, really, really wanted it. And that was evident. And that was, I think, went a long way in convincing city council that this was an issue that the community cared about and that the voters deserved to see on the ballot. So that was the way we went. If you've got a billion people that are fired up about this and you hate your city council members, or they just we don't like talking to those people, then petition route maybe would work better. But for us, city council route went great, and it was a lot of one-on-one meetings, but we got it done.
Oh, cool. Well, I'll follow up. I'm not sure I know more about the commissioners than I do the council when it comes to that. So
For
we're
sure.
home rule too, so I'll follow up and also talk to you later. So thanks.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Of course. I think I saw Betsy's hand next. Betsy still has her hands up. Yep.
So Dylan, here in Idaho, I'm in Boise. We had ranked choice voting and open primaries on a state ballot, and our experience was that we spent a significant amount of time showing people how it worked. But thinking back on it, good political communication has stories. It doesn't, show you how to pick your favorite ice cream. It tells you a story about a community that tried it and how it was impacted. So people would remember how it made a community or sets of decisions better. So I encourage you when you're training your canvassers to help them think about storytelling.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the name of the game, right? I mean, it is so valuable to hear, not what this does or how it does it, but other places that have done it already and loved it. I mean, that's so crucial, and we are, really really lucky, I think, to have some examples to draw from in Colorado that have adopted ranked choice voting and really loved it, and the voters have experienced it and said, yes, this allowed me to finally, for the first time ever, not worry, oh my gosh, am I throwing away my vote if I'm actually, supporting who I want to support? And really opens up the process and allows voters the meaningful choice that they deserve. And I think that is such an important reminder, Betsy, that is, where campaigns are won and where minds are changed. And we need to be focused on that in our canvassing efforts and just more generally as we're communicating this to the public. It's been really, really fun to talk to members of the Fort Collins City Council and Boulder City Council that were either involved with putting ranked choice on the ballot in those communities or were elected to the city council because of ranked choice, and just the fundamentally different and better experiences that they had because of the system and what it took to get ranked choice in their communities and what it took to educate their voters. So I'm really excited that in Longmont we are not going at it alone. But we are instead following in the footsteps of communities that have already had positive experiences with this reform.
Jean gave a presentation several months ago about how it changed the Portland city election. And so being able to talk about people being represented that hadn't been represented before is because you're going to talk to, rednecks and blue necks, and everybody needs to have a feeling that their voice might finally find some representation.
Amen to that. Absolutely. Thank you, Betsy. Tom.
Hey, great effort, Dylan. I had a couple questions. One of them, you're having your city council on the ballot. I'm curious why the mayor isn't on there. You know, like Boulder had the mayor and not the city council. And I've always been curious if Boulder's moving towards RCV for the council or what your perspective is on that.
Absolutely. And I should have been more clear. I didn't include the mayor on this graphic because the mayor is elected in every cycle, and so I just felt like it would clog up the graphic. The election, the mayoral election would be moved to ranked choice voting in the same way that the other city
Oh,
council seats would be moved were ranked choice voting to pass. It just wouldn't affect the cycles because the mayor is elected in every election cycle in Longmont. So for us, it's an everything. All the seats are moving, mayor included. And I agree with you. I have always been sad that, in so many ways that Boulder race was historic. It was the first big city in Colorado to begin using ranked choice voting. It was, led the way for it to be for ranked choice voting to be a voting method that county clerks running elections for cities could use and all that amazing stuff. But they did do it in a piecemeal way of just the mayor and not anyone else. And I really think that they would benefit from multi-winner ranked choice voting in Boulder because they elect their city council, the other 8 members of their city council in alternating groups of 4, all at large. And so making that a 4-winner, multi-winner ranked choice voting race would be, as easy as snapping a finger. You would no cycle realignment, no nothing necessary. So I hope that Boulder inspires us to do this, and then we inspire Boulder to do that, and we can just keep building on each other.
So I
amen.
can speak to that a little bit. The Boulder Voting Methods team has actually been actively, going after Boulder City Council members. We've met one-on-one with almost all of them to talk about this, and some of them are supportive, but we just haven't yet gotten it to bubble up to the top of their to-do list. And so we're really hoping that, as Dylan just said, that maybe this will succeed in Longmont, and then maybe we'll have better luck pestering the Boulder City Council to do the same.
And I will say in my experience, because I was the one, doing all the arm twisting in Longmont is like it helps so much to have a champion. And in Longmont, we got so lucky in that at the time she was the mayor pro tem, but she was elected mayor in 2025, Mayor Hidalgo Faring. Who has been our strongest advocate on council and has been letting us helped us to formulate the policy and pushing it and make getting it on the agenda and seeing where the other council members are like to identify your champion has just been so key in Longmont, and we got so lucky that ours was the mayor number one, but such an effective mayor at getting things done. So it's been a really positive experience in you meet really awesome people doing awesome work from time to time in local government, and hopefully there's someone that can be like that on Boulder Council or other councils that are looking for this.
Can you spell her name?
Susie, Susie Hidalgo, Hidalgo hyphen Faring, Fahring.
Fabulous. Like you need to celebrate people like that.
Oh my
Absolutely.
gosh, she deserves all the credit in the world. Yeah, she was amazing. Um, But yeah, I mean, so I should really get that link for our kickoff event because I would love to see as many of you that can make the drive down to Longmont there as can make it. But I'm really amped about this reform. I think it's such a win that we were able to get it through council, but I cannot stress enough how small the window of time is that we have, in which to communicate this amazing opportunity to voters, and we need everyone's help to do it. And even if that's, chipping in $50, whatever you can, the small dollar donations really add up. However you can support, we need your support. And just so grateful. I mean, the league has been such a key, communicator and trusted messenger on this issue, studied this, knows what they're doing. And, when folks on Longmont City Council heard that the league was behind this, and that a number of our local league experts or members were really in the group pushing for it, that went a long way. it went a really, really, really long way towards legitimizing the effort. And so my heartfelt thanks to all y'all at the league who have been with us, over these past few years getting it on the ballot. We couldn't have done it without you.
Any other questions for Dillon?
I have one more. Um, so you brought up donations. Is this effort totally grassroots funded, or are you able to get other groups to help get you those signs and stuff?
I mean, as of right now, we're pretty much totally grassroots. I'm always looking for money wherever I can find it. But yeah, like right now, like it's the grassroots dollars, and that's what we're looking for. So yeah.
Okay.
Else? Hey, thank you, Dillon.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. You are truly inspiring. And before we move to our next speaker, I want to throw a shout out to Robbie Moreland, who's here. Speaking of champions, well, she is the Dillon for Fort Collins. So, anything you want to add real quick, Robbie? Not to put you on the spot, but I am.
Thanks for not putting me on the spot, Beth. Appreciate that. I just want to add that I'm just impressed with Dillon, and I'm so glad you got this through the city council, Dillon. It's just amazing what you did, and you're right. You can't express that adequately enough about how tight that time frame is to get the people educated. As I've talked to Dillon before about this, and I really feel like education is a very tenuous thing, because people can really get down the wrong lane trying to describe ranked choice voting. They have all the best intentions. They can knock on the door, and then, man, it can go off the rails quick if someone throws a question at you that you don't quite understand how to answer the question, and now maybe you've angered somebody about ranked choice voting instead of pumping them up, and you didn't know it. You didn't know how you were going to answer that question, and so in Fort Collins, as I told Dillon, we just took a different tack. We are like, the only people who are going to knock on doors are the people who know about ranked choice voting in detail, and that was the League of Women Voters. Everyone else, and we had 150 volunteers walking 10,000 doors. They put flyers on the doors. They put handbills to really, precisely say the pros and cons, and then lead them to websites and lead them to YouTube videos, so that the conversation can't go off the rails, and everyone is saying the same message. That's the hardest part, to make sure your team of volunteers is spot on with their talking points.
Can I just
Thanks,
say something
Robbie.
about Robbie really fast? Robbie is like she is so awesome, you guys. Like I cannot describe how Robbie and I were up in Leadville at a conference earlier this summer, and Robbie was describing some of the details that the tricks things that she ran into, and the Fort Collins folks ran into, and they were getting it through city council, and it was just therapeutic to hear, oh my gosh, the same stuff that is happening in Longmont right now is happening in Fort Collins, or happened in Fort Collins, and it was all okay. And they won, and it succeeded. And I've just had so many conversations with Robbie where afterwards I'm like, okay, I can do this. This is possible. And so Robbie, just thank you so much. I mean, I really do think that, cities inspiring one another is true, and just people inspiring one another is also true. Of like, this has happened before. This has been done before. It's worked in the past in other places, and why not here? And that's why I started in Longmont, and that's what I hope. I'm sure Fort Collins is going to be that for so many other places around the state. So thank you.
Nobody wants you to have to reinvent the wheel, Dillon. Pick our brains. We'll help you as much as we can.
So, power of the people in a democracy to make real change. Thanks to Dillon and Robbie, and thanks, Dillon, for your talk tonight. That was great. So, to our next speaker, Edouard Heitzmann is a current mathematics PhD candidate at CU Boulder under the mentorship of Professor Jean Clellan. Hey, Jean. His family moved from France to the United States in 2016, and he's been a Boulder resident since 2023. Edouard's field of research is about devising a risk-limiting audit framework for multi-winner ranked choice voting elections. He just paid an academic visit to the Melbourne-based group of experts in that field last June, which he can tell us about, among other things, in his presentation. Ed, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. I'm going to go through the kind of terrifying process of sharing my screen as well. Hopefully you can see something right now. Okay, does this look good? Can you see something?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
wonderful. Great. Yeah, so I do promise I'm going to be telling you about auditing eventually. I also want to tell you about sort of the picture of where this fits in the like, I guess why we have audits for STV in the first place, and why this has been kind of a holdup so far. And to do that, I guess I'm going to kind of try to draw a very concrete timeline of what things look like post 2026 election to get STV implemented in Longmont by 2029. So I'm going to be thinking with my heads deliberately in the clouds here. We're thinking very far ahead. The priority for right now should definitely be to campaign, kind of focus more on what Dillon is saying. But I'm just going to be kind of giving you a glimpse of what comes after. And I have this picture in front of my slides over here of this is an actual Longmont ballot from 2025. The reason I have this picture is I think it illustrates nicely why we want audits in the first place. So what's interesting about this ballot, it has what we call an overvote over here for, I guess, the school district race. So this voter initially filled in a bubble for Peggy A. Kelly and then changed their mind and later said Hadley Solomon afterwards. And this is actually kind of how the ballot was digitized. So this is like publicly available software that kind of shows how each ballot was recorded and adjudicated, and it kind of shows for this specific ballot, the machine could tell that there was an overvote, something weird happened, and then either the machine or an election administrator came in and adjudicated the ballot by kind of considering the voter intent over here. And so these kind of weirdnesses in ballots are why we have audits in the first place. We kind of want to make sure that weirdnesses like this are not that common, and when they do exist, that they're not common enough to kind of significantly change the outcome of the election. Okay, before I get into the details, I have like an obligatory vocabulary slide, which thankfully Dillon kind of went over most of this already. I'm just going to be using these acronyms a lot, and I want to make sure no one's confused by them. And if any of the acronyms are confusing at any point, feel free to stop me. I'm briefly going to switch back to my Zoom tab so I can see you all. Okay, so I have a video of you over here. I don't have my eyes on the chat, but definitely interrupt me if any of this gets confusing terms-wise. So, okay, I'm going to be using this acronym RCV for ranked choice voting. This is what Dillon's been talking about already. When we have RCV in a single winner race, Dillon was talking about this, we call it instant runoff voting, or IRV, and I'm going to be using this acronym a lot. And the very big picture, this is kind of a grotesque summary, but in IRV, what the literature says is minority groups do tend to run more often, but they don't necessarily win more often, because you still need that 51% of the vote to actually have a chance of winning. If I have an RCV race with multiple winners, we call that single transferable vote, and I'm going to be using this acronym STV. And again, without getting into the details, kind of the very big picture here is minority groups do run and they do win more often. And if you have a group of voters that's cohesive and kind of deserves a seat, then they do tend to get seats proportional to their size. And then one final acronym I'm going to be using a lot is just an administration we interact with a lot in the auditing world, and that's Secretary of State. So that's a Colorado kind of executive institution that kind of oversees election administration and auditing, among other things. Okay, and so as I said, my goal here is to kind of draw a picture of what happens in the 3 years from the moment that Longmont hypothetically decides to have STV, so that's this coming November, until the first time that they would have STV in November of 2029. And I'm not going to be making this stuff up. I'm actually going to be making like a pretty direct comparison to what happened in 2023. So that's when Boulder had its first coordinated instant runoff voting election. And the comparison is really good because the kind of administrative status of IRV in 2020, when Boulder voted to have their IRV elections, kind of how the SOS thought of IRV back then and the rules that existed for IRV is pretty much exactly the same status that STV is in right now. And so kind of a lot of the administrative processes that we're going to see in 2023 for IRV, we're going to have to go through again in 2029 for STV. So I'm going to fill in this picture right now, and it's going to be very overwhelming, but I promise I'm going to go through this kind of step by step in a second. I just want to point out sort of in this filled in picture, there's kind of three main kind of clusters of things that have to happen, which I've color coded in hopefully a colorblind friendly way for Neil. So there's all of the green, which is kind of auditing. That's where I come in. In 2023, it was also a group of academics that were brought in by the county to run the audits of the election. All of the blue is legislative action. So in 2021, there was very swift action kind of following Boulder's passage to IRV to kind of enable that to be coordinated. And that was super important. That's kind of what we got right, actually, in 2023. And then the final kind of moving piece is all this purple stuff, and that's certification of voting software by the Secretary of State, and then implementation by the counties. Okay, and so I kind of want to show how these moving parts interact with each other. So here's maybe a diagram that helps with that. So Longmont is down here. It's a municipality. And in the modern day of elections, so like broadly since like maybe 2017, municipalities don't run their own elections. They tend to offshore that to the counties. So the counties are the people who actually own the election machines and they run the tabulation. And like when your ballot gets put in the ballot box, it goes to the counties and they oversee chain of custody. And then they also run audits kind of after the election happens. And okay, in order to run an election, so this is kind of how things worked out for IRV, at least in 2023. The counties will usually lease machines and kind of use software provided by election providers. So in Colorado, that's Liberty Vote usually, and then sometimes True Ballot as well. So these are kind of private companies that make software and then put it up for hire by counties. But in order to be allowed to use the software from an election provider, that software needs to be certified by the Secretary of State. So that's the SOS up here. And so what the SOS does is they kind of set forth the rules for what the election software is supposed to do. So think of this as like a hoop that the election provider has to jump through. The Secretary of State like sets the standards, and then afterwards the election provider has to actually jump through that hoop. They have to prove that kind of whatever they're doing satisfies the criteria of the SOS. And this is a pretty long and expensive process over here. And then finally, kind of the Secretary of State also tells the counties sort of broadly how they should run their elections. And funding wise as well, the Secretary of State gets their money from the state legislature, and then the Secretary of State kind of dispenses that money to the counties as well. Okay, and yeah, usually the counties, so okay, I guess all of the purple stuff on its own could allow a county to run an election if they chose to. But usually the counties will always refuse to run an election unless they're actually forced to do so by law. The reason for that is running an election is pretty risky. So litigation wise, if you do something wrong when you run the election, you run a kind of lot of legal risk. And it's going to cost you a lot of money to run an election at the county level. And if they can get out of that, they're going to choose to. So like Broomfield is a good example of that in 2025. They just didn't want to bother running an IRV election. So they kind of considered they weren't forced to. And so the way to force a county to actually coordinate an election is to pass a law that tells them like, no. If the city asks you to run this election, you're forced to do so. And also in the past, the state legislature has passed laws that tell the SOS like, get your act together and actually write rules for these election methods to be used. And then the final piece of this puzzle is academic. So in the past, kind of when we had complicated election methods to run audits for, usually academics were brought in at the county level first to consult and to kind of write the software that you need to do an audit. And then later on, kind of after there's a proven kind of a proof of concept at the county level, usually kind of this gets implemented at the statewide level. So this happened in 2025 for IRV as well. Okay, so now I'm going to go through each of these kind of three main moving pieces and show what happened in 2023 and what we can learn from that history, and then try to kind of use that to build a timeline for 2029. So, okay, the first piece I'll go over is the legislative. So there's kind of three main laws to think of in the context of ranked choice voting. So there's two very old laws that passed kind of in the first wave of ranked choice voting popularity nationwide. Ooh, I'm seeing something in the chat. Let me see if I can. Okay, well, my computer is weird enough that I can't see the chat, but if someone wants to read out a question, I'd be happy to answer it.
It just says amazing detail and info.
Oh, great. I'm glad. Okay. Yeah, so these two these two laws date back to kind of the first wave of popularity of ranked choice voting. Okay, this one up top says just we're going to allow ranked choice voting for elections. So the state legislature said, SOS, please make sure that if a city wants to use this, you at least have the rules written for what it should look like for software to be certified to run this. And then around the same time, so kind of Colorado led the charge nationwide for getting very serious audits of our elections. And so this law in particular said you have to run risk limiting audits for any coordinated election. So remember, coordinated means the county's kind of taking charge for the cities. Great. And then the kind of modern law that mattered in the 2023 process for Boulder is this HB 21-1071. This one is very apropos. And it says counties, or I guess municipalities can they can force a county to run an IRB election for them. So kind of exactly that thing we were talking about of a county can't just wash their hands and say, not my problem, you figure it out yourself. And I guess it's not clear, like there are interpretations of the Colorado revised statutes that say that maybe we don't need a law like this for STV, but I guess there's kind of a legal negative space over here, right? Of like, if this law was needed for IRV, there's no kind of additional law that exists for STV that didn't exist for IRV. So it would be kind of hard to justify not needing a new law if this one was really necessary back in 2021. And so here's what the timeline looked like for IRV. I hope my bar is not in the way for you guys. Oops. I hope you guys can see what's down here. But so this is kind of how things worked out timeline-wise. So this is when Boulder voted to have IRV on the ballot for their city council or for their mayoral election over here. And just the next legislative session is when the state legislature got their act together and passed a law that said basically, yes, the counties are going to have to run this election for Boulder. And this law went into effect kind of just in time. And I hope you can see this arrow over here. But what this is saying is the original law as written only went in effect for single county municipalities in 2023. And the second part, which governs multi-county municipalities like Longmont, part of Longmont is in Weld County, that did not go into effect until July of 2026, so literally last month. And that's maybe something that we've got to worry about in the kind of 2029 timeline. So here's kind of the kind of learning points that I take from 2023 for just legislation in particular. I guess things that are going our way in 2029 is that we can reuse a lot of the language that's in the current law right now. Like there's a world in which if we get a new law for STV, it can be just a very narrow mirror of what was written for IRV. There's maybe not a lot that needs to be done here. And also another thing I listed as a pro is there's kind of a currently very favorable political environment to ranked choice voting. Generally, I think a lot of people are worried about gerrymandering and the two-party system. And so I think a lot of state legislators are going to be very excited about kind of passing a bill that says that they're trying to address this situation. On the cons, I mean, so this is a con that they had to deal with in 2023 as well, of like, we only have 3 years to do this, and state legislatures are not easy to navigate. In particular, the HB 21-1071, it passed by, I think, a margin of 20 to 15 votes in the Senate in 2021. And so it's kind of no done deal that this is going to happen on time. And also a kind of more current problem is at the state level, we're kind of lacking funding, and that's kind of part of what enabling legislation has to do is kind of put aside a pack of money for the SOS to distribute for the coordination of these elections. Another con maybe is, I mean, especially Prop 31, but I guess more generally in Colorado, we've had a couple attempts at implementing ranked choice voting that have failed. And so like in particular, when I was hearing from Jeannie Joseph at an event last year, she kind of mentioned these recent failures of RCV and pointed out like she wants to see kind of more voter interest before it's actually something the state legislature worries about. HB 24 was this reform of county commissions to use STV as well, or among other things to use STV and also to increase the number of commissioners. And yeah, the last con is Longmont being a multi-county municipality kind of makes it a bit more nebulous to actually write legislation that kind of goes into effect in time to affect 2029. But hopefully kind of, especially this first bullet point over here, the fact that kind of we have a lot of experience that's transferable from IRV is going to make this less of a problem.
Edward?
Yeah.
So Portland, Oregon is also a multi-county municipality, similar to Longmont. Most of it is in Multnomah County, but a little bit of it is in one or two other counties. So we have a model we can follow. Just a
Yeah, and actually, I'm gonna talk a little bit more in a second about kind of what we have to learn from Portland. But yeah, that's a great example.
Can you go back to the previous screen and also can you get rid of the UR share screen
Oh,
sharing?
shoot. I think I can't actually. That's just
I
an issue with my. Let me see if I
you
can move
might be
this
able
to
to
a different
move it
tab.
down so that
Uh, is this better?
yeah, all better.
Okay, great. I think whenever
Thank
someone
you.
pings in the chat, that bar is going to reappear for me. My Zoom app is just kind of very broken because I'm on a
Got it.
weird computer.
Thanks.
But I can shift around to deal with that. Okay. Yeah, so that's this last arrow I was talking about, right? The second part of this HB 21 to 1071 law did not go into effect until literally last month. And so the kind of laws in the past have distinguished between single county and multi-county cities. And that's something we have to deal with now. Um, okay, so I guess moving part number two is the certification process. So that's kind of where the SOS and the counties matter a bit more. Yeah, I just added a couple bullet points here that kind of tell how the story now is different from in 2023. So since 2023, yeah, our SOS has made it so that providers can't get certified on even election years. So particularly 2028 is off the table. This is something that Jenna Griswold implemented in 2025, and that makes kind of the certification timeline a bit tighter for us. And then another thing that our current SOS has done for us is she's moved up the deadline to get certified in any given year to January 15th. So for example, if we wanted Liberty Vote to get certified in 2027, a Liberty Vote would have to have a first kind of informal meeting. There's not a lot of requirements for this meeting, but they just have to schedule it before January 15th of 2027, which is coming up very fast. And in particular, there's a very narrow world where if we need to wait until we get a new SOS, that new SOS takes office on January 12th. So that's a 3-day window to schedule that first meeting if certification is the way we're going about things.
Dylan has his hand up.
Oh, great. Yeah, go ahead and ask your questions. I lost your camera. I lost cameras because I moved my tab over. Go
Oh,
ahead.
no worries. So okay, so hold on. Is this I mean, I don't think that there is law yet that would allow a vote system provider like Liberty to even put forth its voting system for certification for STV.
Yes, there
And
is. That's
so,
Rule 26. So that's HB 1378 over here. This one asked the SOS to write the rules for what it would look like for a Liberty vote to get certified to run STV. And currently that's encoded in Rule 26 of the SOS. It's a
so
very kind
I
of bare bones rule. Mhm.
but I can, as a voting system provider, go and ask for certification for my use for my the use of my voting system in an STV election.
Yes, a provider could choose to do that if they wanted to.
Have
However,
we
a bullet
have
point.
we asked the SOS that that's true?
I
I mean, is that their understanding?
I think the current SOS would put in roadblocks for a provider to do that. But legally speaking, there is Rule 21 kind of sets the process, sets the terms for how a provider should go about getting certified to run STV. There's
And
another part of this picture which is kind of complicating things as well, which is that providers right now are just exhausted and not very excited to go through the certification process all over again. It's a very expensive and long process, and their view is that doing it all over again for STV is redundant.
And one other question is the idea or the notion that or the requirement that the certification process uh not be conducted in even years something that was required by law or just an administrative regulatory choice that
That is an SOS rule. So, right, I guess, yeah, it's as easy to repeal as it was to install. And in particular, the SOS just kind of installed that rule unilaterally. So, yeah, you can imagine a rule, or sorry, a world where if a friendly SOS gets installed on January 12th, they could just say that rule no longer applies. There would be like an 80-day process to kind of change the rules again, but that's something the SOS decides on their own.
awesome. Thank you, Edward. That's so helpful.
Yeah. Okay, this last bullet point is kind of to Celeste's point earlier. So kind of Colorado is very unique in the United States in that our certification process um, it basically covers elections end to end. So you can think of elections as having multiple steps. Like there's chain of custody of ballots to get them to the county office. Once they get to the county office, they've got to get scanned by a machine and digitized. Once you have kind of a digitized cast vote record, you've got to run an actual tabulation process and then declare kind of the winners of the election, and then after that, run an audit of the election. In Colorado, those first three steps, so chain of custody, or I guess those middle two steps really, digitization plus tabulation, those get certified together. So I forget the name of the suite that Liberty Vote got certified for IRV, but that kind of certification covers everything from digitization to tabulation. And in particular, there is kind of no current certificate for Liberty to run digitization on its own, followed by someone else running an STV tabulation for those digital cast vote records. But so elsewhere in Portland, that latter option is what they do. They kind of have an election provider just do that first step, and then they have a third party software provider actually tabulate the election for them. Our SOS has rules written for that. That's rule, I think, 21.12. So it specifically applies to multi-county cities like Longmont, and it's for IRV only at the moment. But it says if you're in that situation, you are allowed to use a provider to just digitize the ballots, send them over to the kind of central county who's running the election for you. For Longmont, that would be Boulder County. And then actually kind of have someone else who's federally certified. There's no need for the SOS to get involved in that certification process, actually tabulate the election. So that's actually kind of what I recognize as the most likely way that we get certification for STV in 2029. And okay, just to kind of summarize, this is how things went down in 2023. So remember the kind of legislative process happened very, very early over here in 2021, and around a year later, that's when the SOS started changing their rules to kind of reflect what the laws required of them. In particular, right, this is the certification process that the providers had to go through. This took a long time. And I guess there's a world where they have to go through this again for STV in 2020, I guess starting 2027. Okay, and so here's my kind of takeaways from kind of learning from 2023. Again, kind of the big pro that we have going in our favor is we have a lot that we can learn from IRV. The IRV process was kind of grueling, and we don't have to go through all of it again. In particular, kind of in this last slide, over here, Rule 21, this was the SOS just kind of deciding how it's going to write the rules for providers like Liberty Vote to just get anything certified at all, not specifically IRV, and that's going to apply to STV as well. So that's a wheel we don't have to reinvent right there. Yeah, as I pointed out, there's kind of alternative routes to certification. So this very long purple process over here, we might not actually need to go through it again. If the SOS is friendly, they could just change the rules and we would be able to have STV. And then last pro, providers have more experience with RCV elections. So kind of that certification process as well. They're more familiar with the specifications that is expected of them and how to undergo testing. On the cons, I mean, we have kind of a famously currently hostile SOS. She's been very uninterested in certifying STV. She's mentioned audits, I think, quite often as the reason that she's not interested in certifying STV. But remember, the kind of certification process and the auditing process are two very separate processes, and she could start on that first one without having the second one in place yet. There's also
in what forum are you hearing her say that, or is it people in her office?
I guess it's indirectly through people like Dillon. But I guess, you can also mention Broomfield refusing to run their 2025 IRV election, citing audits again as the main issue. Although kind of by 2025, HB 2021 1071 had gone into effect, and Broomfield is a single county municipality. But I think counties and the SOS broadly are just kind of exacerbated by ranked choice voting, and I want to avoid it at all costs if possible.
Yeah, I'm just trying to be clear whether this is the Department of State, specific individuals there, the actual secretary.
Yeah, I don't know that the Secretary of State has gone on the record saying that she's not interested in certifying STV, but kind of there seems to be a friction coming there.
I hadn't heard that, so I would be. I wouldn't want to piss people off by putting words in their mouth.
Sure.
I can speak to that a little bit, Edouard, about where in the department that's coming from, if that would be helpful. But if not, I'm happy to leave it and for you to keep going.
Yeah, maybe at the end.
For sure.
Okay, great. And the last bullet point over here is something I mentioned already. Liberty Vote is kind of exhausted at the moment. I mean, I guess you can look at True Ballot as well. Maybe they're more interested in getting recertified, but that very long and grueling certification process is expensive and time consuming. And currently it doesn't sound like the providers are interested in going through it again. So kind of putting these two moving parts together, this is kind of my most likely estimate of how things could go down from 2026 to 2029. I don't think that we need to rely on a provider to start the certification process in January 12th or whatever. Like that is an alternative scenario, which I'll talk about in a second. But I think the currently most likely thing is to hope for enabling legislation very early in 2027 again. And then once that happens, I think the SOS will be able to change the rules without even needing a provider to recertify. Um, and then kind of you'll have to look at what that looks like for a county to get that provider integrated into their coordination protocols. And then the kind of the big thing is getting that enabling legislation to go into effect for a city like Longmont in January of 2029. Otherwise, there's still a world where the county could refuse to coordinate this election over here. I mentioned, yeah, okay. So there's kind of we need one of two things to really happen: either swift legislative action in 27, which is what I have illustrated here, or alternatively, we could get away with late legislative action if we had a friendly SOS who was kind of willing to help the cause of STV. And so, yeah, in particular, here are three alternative scenarios that I've kind of cooked up that don't rely on state legislation very early. So if we have a very proactive election provider who goes into that window from January 12th to January 15th, it's possible they could just get certified end to end on their own. And then if we do already have certification, it becomes more plausible for a state legislature to put a very short deadline for their new law to go into effect. There's a world in which we don't need the legislation to.
i.e. Liberty Vote.
Yes, that's right. This process would have to be kickstarted by a Liberty Vote or True Ballot in exactly January, like 12th or something. An alternative reality is maybe we don't even need any state legislature action at all if we have kind of a very friendly SOS and kind of counties who are willing to go out of their way to coordinate an STV election, even though there's no law forcing them to do so. But this picture over here kind of leaves funding very ambiguous. HB 21-1071 clarified sort of where the money should come from to run an IRV election, and it would be less clear sort of who pays for the STV elections in this world over here. And down here is the nightmare scenario where kind of no one is sympathetic to the STV cause, so the legislator doesn't do anything, and the SOS and the counties are hostile. And in this world, there are still kind of interpretations of the statutes as enacted right now that would allow Longmont to sue the counties if they wanted to. But I don't even know that Longmont would be interested in doing that. The kind of current ballot measure says if there's no certification by 2029, we're simply not going to run STV. So this is a very expensive, time-consuming, and unlikely reality over here. I just want to point out that it's possible.
Edward,
Yeah.
when you talk about the courts stepping in, is one of them the issues like the Colorado Voting Rights Act, which says
Yeah, I've thought
talks
about
about
covert.
proportional representation?
I don't see a way to interpret the Colorado Voting Rights Act as giving standing to someone who would want to sue. And by someone, we really mean Longmont, or in a narrow world, Longmont voters. Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I don't think that would be kind of the law that you would sue under. I think this section 17116 is the kind of one that says broadly counties have to coordinate elections for municipalities when they kind of have overlapping boundaries, which is exactly Longmont's situation. And it doesn't give exceptions for IRV or for STV. So there's a reading of that law that says just kind of the county has to do it regardless of what happens. But if that's the argument you're making, then you kind of have to defend why HB 21-1071 was needed in the first place. And that's kind of a complicated legal argument to make.
Well, I don't
Jen
think
might
these
want to
are
weigh in
mutually
on this
exclusive.
because she's worked on the Colorado Voting Rights Act. I'd love to hear what Jen.
Yeah, maybe I'll try to skip ahead because this is, again, kind of really not the reality we want to be going for in the first place.
Right.
But yeah, this is interesting to think about, just maybe not what I want to focus on right now.
Well, I would just keep it on this slide and say, gosh, to the extent that both for the campaign now and for support from the clerks, the argument is made that, oh my gosh, we have a COVRA, and both Longmont and the citizens want to, comply faithfully and vigorously with COVRA, and that requires proportional representation because at large is bad. And so why in the world would a clerk get in the way of anything, or a Secretary of State?
Sure.
I just think it's, you can threaten without.
Yeah, there are
making
certainly
people
compelling
mad.
legal arguments to be made here. I think legally, though, the picture is really murky because of HB 21-1071 having been passed as a law that made the situation so clear. really living in a legal negative space here of like, if we don't need a new law to force the coordination of STV elections, why was that one needed?
Well,
I-
you can either have a law or you can have a grassroots effort. I mean, you have to convince people, and laws are just one way to do it. It doesn't mean that because we convince people once with a law, that's the only way, a lawsuit isn't an option. Anyway, move on. I just
Yeah,
think
yeah, I
that's a
will be
really
moving on because
valuable
I do
approach.
want to get to the last part of this picture.
I'm
Um,
sorry, Edward, can I
yeah,
just
go for it.
add really fast? I do just want to really kind of hesitate and push back on this, this world where Longmont's needing to sue in order to do STV. I mean, we're already having conversations with Longmont's State House delegation, with the leading candidates for Secretary of State, with the Boulder and Weld County clerks, with all these stakeholders, and they are not hostile to this.
No, I agree with you. I can't emphasize enough. This is a
yeah.
very fringe
Um,
world, and this is not the world I believe will happen. I believe this world is going to be happening, where we will have
yeah.
legislation by 2027, and it will be a very easy certification process.
So
I really don't.
I just want to
I,
push back because when we're in our, when we're in campaign mode here, if people are hearing, whoa, this isn't even legal and we're going to need to sue and we're going to need to like that's just not
No,
the world we're
well,
living
what I'm
in.
saying is there is a reading of the current laws that says actually it's so illegal that we don't need a new law. But again, I completely agree with you. The
For
kind of
sure.
most likely outcome is one where we have to fight very little actually to get STV
For
implemented.
sure.
This
Great,
picture
thank
over
you.
here. All right, I'm going to move on. So moving part 3 is about audits. And let me tell you a tiny bit more about what audits do before I get into those details. So kind of audits broadly are, so you're looking at ballots and comparing them to how they were read by the system. And the point of doing that is you want to find any discrepancies between how the ballot was cast and how it was interpreted. So kind of think back to that first slide with the overvote ballot. When there's discrepancies, you want to report them to election officials. So the SOS usually has a look at what the audit process kind of concluded and tries to take away lessons for next elections. You're looking for systematic patterns of noise. So think of like the butterfly ballots in 2000 in Florida of like a kind of hardware failure causing ballots to systematically be misinterpreted. And then, okay, if you do find kind of ballots that were interpreted wrong, investigate kind of what the miscommunication was. Also kind of take away lessons for future elections. Do we need to change our hardware or do we need to have better voter education? And especially kind of relevant for RCV, right? Because there's more opportunities for voters to fill in their ballot wrong. And then also one thing that audits do is provide confidence that the election's correct or correct that the tabulation of the election was correct and that kind of any mistakes that you saw in the ballot record would not have changed the outcome. And so that last bullet point is kind of a nice transition into what we mean by risk limiting audit. So if I throw these two words, risk limiting, in front of the word audit, what we're talking about changes a tiny bit. This audit becomes like a statistical procedure now. And the point of this procedure is to verify with kind of a bounded confidence that the outcome was reported correctly. So in other words, if the outcome according to the true ballots should have been different, so that's this part over here, then the audit should fail with high probability. And so it's a statistical procedure in the sense that usually we look at as few ballots as possible, but in a minute, Neil is going to get very mad at me if I don't mention that risk limiting audits can always be achieved if I just count every single ballot in the election. That's a valid statistical procedure. It's just very expensive, and the counties don't want to do that in general. So kind of the place where I come in is I come up with clever mathematical ways to tell you how to sample as few ballots as you need while having as high confidence as possible that the outcome was correct. And okay, I'm going to go a tiny bit more into detail about kind of what I'm saying that's new about audits. But here's the kind of picture for what auditing might look like what auditing, sorry, looked like in 2023. Yeah, okay. So to this bullet point, I think there are readings of the laws as written right now that says that RLAs are not strictly necessary. So right, this bottom part over here is a very different thing from what these bullet points are asking someone to do over here. And there are ways to audit an election in a non-risk limiting audit or in a non-risk limiting way where you just open a bunch of ballots and kind of look for patterns of what happened. It's possible that we could get away with not using a risk limiting audit in 2029, but I think everyone wants an RLA to happen because RLAs are the kind of the gold standard of audits. And okay, the lessons to draw from 2023, I think what's really marking about this timeline is there's this huge gap over here between 2020 and 2022. What was happening in this gap is the SOS kind of was at a loss. They didn't really know how to conduct an RLA for an IRV election. And I don't think they were fully aware that there had already been successful pilots of RLAs for IRV in San Francisco in 2019. Um, and 2022 is when they turned around and finally realized that they were missing a part of the picture for IRV implementation. And what the SOS did then was say it's actually not going to be our responsibility at the state level. The counties are going to run these audits for us. And then the county kind of panicked in 2023, and kind of at the very last minute, in the month before the election happened, they finally contracted the same people from San Francisco and indirectly the kind of Melbourne experts that I've worked with this summer to write these auditing procedures for them.
No, those folks were working on that contract for years as contracted by the Secretary of State. And in parallel,
That's
we're
not what I
helping
heard from
Boulder out.
Vanessa. I did ask her about this last week. But maybe we should talk a tiny bit more about this. I guess kind of what I heard from Vanessa and what I've seen kind of online is that it was a very last minute implementation, especially I think the GitHub
Oh,
repository,
sorry,
the
right.
first
So
commit
the
is
full
in late
commit. Yeah,
2023.
go ahead.
Yeah, okay. And then the kind of final piece of this picture, and this is maybe also a nice thing to learn from IRV in 2023, is that this process of auditing things at the county level later kind of got adopted at the statewide level by the SOS 2 years later, and in particular for Fort Collins. Fort Collins is it Fort Collins? In 2025, they used the IRB procedures that were written into the SOS software, kind of as a kind of lesson taken away from 2023. And that maybe gives you hope for kind of adopting ranked choice voting at the local level, kind of percolates outwards, because once you have the administrative framework to run an RCV election locally, then you can kind of learn from that and implement that at different levels. So, for example, if you want STV for county commissioners, that becomes a lot more viable if you already have a kind of successful trial of STV at the local level. Okay, and here's kind of my lessons
And it's
taken
all
from.
one county for county commissioners. It's in some sense might be easier
Yes.
than
But I guess having any auditing procedure at all, even within a single county, would be good, right? I think the status for RLAs for STV right now is we just don't have a precedent for them within a county or between two counties. Okay, here are my lessons taken from 2023 for auditing. So I do think there is a coherent legal interpretation where RLAs don't even have to fit into the picture. So I might not even need to be kind of my research might not even need to figure in this process at all. And this time around, so you have this really cool academic who lives in Boulder County who's able to consult with you. So hopefully kind of this is easier than bringing in people all the way from Melbourne, Australia. And also kind of this huge gap, right, from, oh gosh, am I able to? Ah. Oh, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I just can't control my slides anymore. Oh, my computer has frozen completely. Okay, great. I'm back. Phew, that was scary. This huge gap from 2020 to 2022, this is something that we can avoid repeating this time around because we have more kind of awareness of the specifications that we need to fill for auditing. Okay, cons, the literature is comparatively less mature. So my first preprint about auditing STV is from this February. So that's a couple months ago, as opposed to for IRV, we had almost a year between the preprint and, sorry, the preprint is over here. We had more than a year between the preprint and the passage of the legislation. But also kind of maybe the better comparison is this period over here between the first paper and the first pilot of an audit. And that's kind of a lot shorter than the timeline we have here. So maybe we're fine actually on that point. And also this time around, we're going to have to be the pilot, right? There's no San Francisco for STV. To my knowledge, we're going to be the first place worldwide to run an audit or a risk limiting audit for STV. Which is exciting, but also kind of means that there's no successful software elsewhere that we can just adopt into our own statewide protocols. Okay, so putting all these pictures together, yeah, I have about 5 minutes left. Okay. This is kind of what the timeline ends up looking like. So this is the 2023 timeline that we built or that we kind of investigated in the past. And this is kind of my best guess of what things might look like in 2029. And it's again kind of in this best world scenario, which I think is actually quite probable, where we have a friendly state legislature that kind of leads the charge towards getting this stuff done quite early. So I'm going to pause here and maybe take a couple questions while we're all staring at the timeline, because I'm about to go into kind of more detail about what audits for STV looks like, and that's going to be more technical and less big picture. I lost video, but hopefully I'm not kind of missing anything important.
Questions?
Okay, maybe not. Maybe I just got all the questions while I was going, and that's great.
Excellent.
All right. Well, in that case, let me just
I have a
quickly
quick
wrap up.
question. Can
Yeah.
somebody put a link to the academic preprint in the chat from February
Yeah,
2026?
it's called Rare. I can get that to you as soon as I can get to see a chat again, which is maybe
Okay.
not the easiest thing. Or I can mail that to you. It's called Rare, Raire. Great. Or are you talking about my preprint? In any case, I'm sure I can get you whatever literature that you want to see.
Thank you.
Okay, so let me tell you about what I've been doing specifically about auditing. So now we're going to go more into the technical details. And I guess I won't do a lot of math for you, but I'm just going to give you a picture of what I'm doing. So as a reminder, this is the same slide that we had earlier. Audits are supposed to do all of those things, and in particular, we call them risk limiting if they kind of successfully raise red flags when the outcome of your election was incorrectly reported. They should fail to certify in that situation. And okay, just to paint you a picture of why this is difficult for STV. So here's an actual tabulation of an STV election that happened in Portland in 2024. This was Portland's first use of STV. What's really interesting about Portland is if you look at these two candidates, Peggy Sue Owens and David Lynn, and in this round over here, they're tied for last place. They have exactly as many votes in their tally. And so I guess without getting into the weeds about STV, how STV works is every round you make a decision. Either you're going to elect somebody if they have enough votes to deserve a seat, or if that doesn't happen, you're going to eliminate the person with the least votes. And when I have a tie like this, I kind of have to make a decision about which of these two candidates I'm going to eliminate. And I guess in this case, it was David Lynn. But so I guess the common kind of wisdom about STV is that if there's more rounds, there's more opportunities for these kind of razor sharp ties or razor sharp margins deciding what you should do next in the election. And so you can imagine kind of like if a single vote was counted incorrectly in this round of the election, something different might have happened, and I need to worry about that. And so just to kind of nail that point in, so here's the same tabulation. I've just kind of started it off in that last column that we were staring at. So here's Peggy Sue Owens and David Lynn, and they're tied for last place. And so this is what happened in reality. David Lynn was eliminated, and Peggy Sue Owens just survived one round longer. And what you have to worry about is the kind of alternative reality where David Lynn made it one round longer than Peggy Sue Owens. And so this is me kind of actually using the data and kind of looking at what would happen if I had broken the tie the other way. And unsurprisingly, David Lynn doesn't make it much farther into the election than Peggy Sue Owens did. He also gets eliminated next, although he has 1,531 votes compared to Peggy Sue Owens' 1,501 votes. But so there's this nightmare scenario when this happens where like, well, what if I had broken the tie in the opposite way? And actually, rather than just making it one round longer, David Lynn makes it multiple rounds longer. So maybe kind of there's this really weird thing that happened where all of Peggy Sue Owens' votes go to David Lynn. And then David Lynn can survive one round longer because now he's beating Doug Clove up here. And maybe all of Doug Clove's votes go to David Lynn as well. And now he can make it run round even deeper into the election and so on and so forth. And maybe there's this counterfactual reality where David Lynn kind of actually gets elected. And so these chaotic things don't tend to happen in reality. It's actually quite rare to see anything like this. Like this did not happen in Portland T1, and it doesn't happen usually. But you've got to worry about it if you're going to audit your election. And so I guess here's like a very high level picture of what my research is about. So what I do is I kind of build a graph that kind of shows each of the decisions you made in the election. So in this case, eliminate this candidate first, eliminate that candidate next, and so on and so forth. This is the round where we had our tie. So I had to make a decision between who I eliminated. And in this case, I include both of the decisions. I'm not going to make a decision here. I'm just going to kind of investigate what would happen afterwards. And kind of as we saw in the previous slides, whichever decision I make here, it doesn't matter because I eliminate the other candidate next, and then I kind of keep going in this well-defined way until I get a set of winners at the end. And then what I do from there is I just kind of think about what would happen if you disturbed a number of votes in the election. So if you kind of lost control of a number of votes, what are the alternative things that could happen? So I'm just going to move around this graph, but this is still the same graph we're looking at. I just shifted the vertices around so that we have room to plot some more. And then, so this is, I guess, the graph that would be possible if I changed exactly one vote in the election. And now if I instead changed exactly 10 votes in the election, there's another thing that could happen over here. I have like another branching path. Rather than eliminate Joe Allen second over here, I could eliminate him first. And I keep going like this. I keep increasing the margin further and further. So more and more things could happen. But importantly, right, like the set of winners at the very end of the day is always the same. It's always Loretta Smith, Jamie Dunphy, and earlier on, Candace Avalos gets elected in this election. And I keep pushing this margin further and further. And this is the kind of most I can push it. Because if I push it, so this is a margin of 670 votes. If I pushed it any further, so this is 672, suddenly I have an alternative winner. And kind of all my research is doing is building a graph like this and just kind of verifying statistically the true election path. I'm not sure exactly where it is in this graph, but it does not escape this graph. It's going to end in one of these vertices that have the set of winners. I want to have one. And I guess the kind of quality check for an audit is sort of how many votes you need to sample in order for the audit to be successful. And so I guess this is a results table from an upcoming paper that I'm about to post a preprint of. And I guess the comparison points here are Portland District 1 has around the same number of voters as Longmont. And then maybe you want to look at Wollongong from Australia, has around the same number of voters. And then the next comparison points are like maybe Minneapolis and Albany, California. And I guess it's a pretty rosy picture. Portland District 1 I can audit with 700 ballots on average. Wollongong I can audit with a bit more. Minneapolis, despite being bigger elections, are more stable, so I can audit them more easily. So, okay, basically, it looks like we're going to be able to do an audit for Longmont, is what I'm trying to tell you here. And since I had access to Longmont data, I just kind of ran my methods on Longmont's 2025 election. This is the graph that I get. So this is the one that had Marsing and Crystal Prieto win. I ran this as a 3-seat election, so the third winner turns out to be Stephen Altschuler. And with this graph and my current methods, I guess the ones that are in my preprint that is coming out soon, I can audit this by sampling 500 ballots around, which is something I think that the county would be happy with. And if I run even better methods on it, I'm actually able to audit this with around 280 ballots. So basically, it's going to be possible. That's what I'm saying here. Okay, I think I'm slightly over time, so I'm going to stop here, but I'm happy to take questions. And again, I can't see anyone, so let me know.
Anyone have any questions for Edouard?
Well, I see Celeste posting a question that I had too. So, like, do we yet have the STV rules required by the 2008 bill?
Yeah, that's Rule 26. It's a very skeletal rule. It doesn't specify a lot, but it basically says sort of what the transfer process should look like when a winner gets seated in STV, what rule I should use to construct quota, stuff like that. And so I guess current Rule 26 is kind of what defines what STV needs to be, and then Rule 21 says in order to be certified, these are the specifications that a provider would have to submit.
And I think that I mean maybe it's more productive at this point to talk about what we think the Department of State is currently saying and thinking, and where we can go with that. But I mean, this is the sort of thing that at least Broomfield said that they hadn't even done it for IRV last time Broomfield declined to move forward with an
Yeah, the
IRV
Broomfield
election.
scenario is really interesting. I mean, what they did was legal because it was just a city ordinance that they passed, right? They just they just postponed IRV implementation. But what they said out loud, so what they did say was that IRV was not auditable, and so they're not going to bother trying, was simply wrong, right? Because we already had a successful audit in Boulder, Colorado of IRV. And we also HB 21-1071 had gone into effect for single county municipalities, which Broomfield is one of. Broomfield actually is its own county. So there's kind of no reason to believe that Broomfield was justified in that claim, but okay, they passed an ordinance allowing them to postpone things, so it was perfectly legal.
Yeah.
We have 2 questions. First from Dillon, second from Celeste.
Well,
Yeah, go for it.
I just want to say, Edward, that I'm so grateful that we have people like you that are, able to operationalize, the aspirations that we have for our elections. I mean, we want STV and we want safe, auditable, verifiable results. And, without your expertise and that the expertise of others, we couldn't have that. So I'm so grateful that we're able to work. And what a coincidence that you're here doing this amazing work in the very county that could be the world's first county to run an
Well, I
STV
don't think it's a
election.
coincidence.
Yeah, right? Coincidence, maybe not. So I'm just so grateful for you and your work.
Yeah, and let me in turn shout out Jen, my advisor, who's kind of the person who set me onto this research specifically because she knew that this was an issue that the counties were going to have. So, she had even more foresight than I do.
Well, and I want to say I am super proud of Edward. His work has surpassed my wildest expectations and often my ability to even follow what he's doing. So I'm very impressed and very proud.
Great. I'm not sure if there's any other raised hands. I'm also happy to keep having these conversations offline, especially like I know there was a lot of interest in these kind of alternative scenarios over here.
Celeste, did you have a
I'll echo the
question?
same thing, and I'm sorry if I've been nitpicking on things. The two of you are doing extraordinary work, and we're very lucky. And my conversations with the folks at the Department of State, I mean, there are people there that get it and that are, I think, appropriately cautious given, where where Vanessa and Michelle have have given them caution in the past about STV. But the fact that you're working with those folks, I think you're coming out with a paper with them. I mean, that's just spectacular, and that's exactly what will make this hopefully much less daunting to anybody. Impressive and daunting though the math and the approach and
Yeah.
I mean, we need people with your expertise and people like John Karen or Vanessa or Michelle, the folks who can implement um, a real production level code that can do this and so on. So yeah.
Great.
Thanks, Neil.
So,
Celeste?
Edward, I think I want to push back against some of the things that you said when,
Yeah, go for it.
1071 passed. We had Rule 26, um, and still, and Boulder conducted a risk limiting audit of their IRV election, and still Broomfield said no, they weren't going to do it, and they used the IRV. They used the fact that the Secretary of State had not done the guidelines for the IRV. Boulder County
Right.
had. And so
So, yeah, remember this timeline over here. Audits, I'm not sure if this is covering it for you as well, but audits
Yeah,
were not implemented at the
if you
statewide
can
level.
make that go
I
away.
can't, well, I can try, but it's going to risk to destroy my slides. I'm very scared to do it. Um, I'm not going to try. I'm like 50% sure it's going to destroy my slides. But okay, what this bullet point says over here is audits were not implemented at the statewide level until exactly November of 2025. Broomfield was saying those things before then, right? It was saying those things, I think, in spring of 2025. So they weren't completely wrong. At the legal level, though, really kind of Broomfield's authority just came from the fact that they passed an ordinance which postponed implementation until 2027. If they had not done that and they made that claim that IRV was not auditable, they would have been susceptible to a lawsuit, almost definitely. I can tell you this with high confidence. Because we're talking about IRV and that had already been done in Colorado. So it's just a failure of the county to try to implement these already known auditing procedures.
and then you talked about Rule 26,
Yeah.
and they don't have RLAs for STV in Rule
Yeah.
26.
So that's an ambiguous. So yes, Rule 26 currently it says if no auditing procedure is known for STV or for any ranked choice voting method, but in particular STV, I think that's 26.2. They say the counties will decide what to do instead, which is kind of legally tenuous because of this. Let me go back to the legislative timeline over here because of this 2009 law, which says you should have a protocol for everything. I guess so. There's multiple pathways to try to legally implement STV without having an RLA method for it, which, by the way, we probably don't need to explore those pathways because I exist and I have research showing how to RLA STV elections. So probably none of this is necessary. But the legal framework in which I say that RLAs are maybe not necessarily a part of the picture is you could say, well, the protocol to audit an STV election is to do a full hand recount of the election. And then later on, when the SOS decide what contests are going to be selected for an RLA, just they don't decide to choose the STV election. And also interesting kind of part of the statutes, I think it's Title 1, Article 7, Section 514(6), I think, says if you have a technological failure of your RLA method, so if you have a protocol written but you just cannot enforce it, here's a backup audit method which is not risk limiting, which you can still run by just kind of sampling randomly 10% of the ballots and just kind of observe them and report back on what you saw, but don't bother doing a risk limit. So there's like multiple pathways that kind of exist for the SOS if they wanted to implement STV to kind of allow for the auditing criterion to not become a roadblock.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I see Tom Alley has a hand raised, although again, I can't really see
Yeah,
it.
you just answered my question. I was wondering what you had mentioned that RLAs may not be legally needed, and you just answered the question just now. So
Yeah,
thank you.
great. Yeah, but basically the SOS has a lot of flexibility in terms of picking the contests that they want to actually RLA, right? So having a theoretical RLA be possible, that's what the law requires, versus having a like actually enforceable RLA are two very different things, and there's some flexibility between the two.
I will say that because Longmont is odd years, there aren't that many options for choosing a candidate contest. So
Mhm.
there could be a high probability that the city
Yeah,
council race would be chosen.
I mean, yeah. So the legal fallback there would be to say, well, okay, here's we have a technological failure of our auditing procedure. We have something that's theoretically possible but practically inactionable. And so instead, we're going to just count 10% of the ballots and just look at the discrepancies that we find. And I mean, there is a non-trivial legal interpretation to make that kind of actually the correct thing to do. In particular, I think HB 081378, this law over here, it kind of had a built-in timeline to say we know that these ranked choice voting elections are not auditable yet. So when the SOS writes the rules for them, until I think it was initially 2013, and then they postponed that until 2017, you don't have to bother writing RLA rules. They're exempt from this other requirement over here. And basically it's up to the counties to perform a quote unquote independent audit of these elections. Now that lapsed, but there is still kind of 514(6), that kind of section of the Colorado revised statutes that kind of
Hi,
tell you what
Buckner.
to do in this. Sorry? I'm not sure if someone tried to say something. But yeah, there's kind of there's a way forward, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not sure if Neil's hand is still raised.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say
Okay.
that I agree that I don't know of anywhere where it explicitly says we need to have support for doing, I'll say an efficient RLA of any voting method
Yeah.
that anybody uses. So, they choose things all the time to audit or not audit because it would be too much work. A full hand count is what it would take to do a tied election, and we've had those, and it isn't, the fact that um, you would have to do a full hand count to count a plurality contest that has a tie doesn't mean we can't adopt plurality voting. So this is fabulous work and it's really important, but I really don't think auditing, we want methods that can be audited. And so from a political science perspective and integrity, we want to do that. But I don't think that the SOS gets to make that call, right?
Well, and in particular, right, certification and auditing are two different parts of the process that you don't need to have a coherent statement about how you're going to audit an election in order to have a certified election method for it, right? And so we can start that first process, even though the SOS may or may not be certain that it's going to be able to figure out that second process later. I can't see video, but I assume there's no more questions.
I don't think there are more questions.
Okay, great.
But thank you so much to both Dillon and Edward for this amazing presentation. Really appreciate it. Um, we will follow up with everyone, and Ed and Dillon, I'm assuming it's okay if I share your slides?
Yeah, for sure. I think this version of my slides I sent you is a tiny bit outdated, but I can share my most recent ones.
Excellent. Thank you. So that and a recording and a few links that were included in the chat will be included in the follow-up email. Thanks very much. I'm also sorry that I said hello to my dog just a minute ago while I had my audio on. Didn't realize that.
Oh,
But
that's okay.
thanks to all. Appreciate you and have a lovely evening.
Bye.
Fabulous, fabulous work. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
great work.
Thank you guys.